Hi, we are here as the biggest fiction nerds at Fight for the Future to talk about a bit about the Realms of Ruin project that launched this week and was quickly taken down, and also just discuss why we think projects like this are really important to the publishing space and really to all artistic spaces as the internet starts to move more and more towards Web3. And so really quick, Ayala, do you want to introduce yourself, like what you do and why you're as big of a nerd as me on this stuff?
Yeah, my name is Ayali Hunt. I'm a huge YA fiction nerd and in general just really love fantasy. And so that's part of my brings me to this conversation. And I'm also the anti-surveillance lead with Fight for the Future. And in general, I'm concerned about independent rights when it comes to creatives and authors. Leah?
Awesome. Yeah. So I am an unpublished speculative fiction author. I'm working on either my third or my fourth book, depending on whether you count the 300 pages of notebook paper that I wrote on a book with dragons when I was 12. I lead on Web3 for Fight for the Future, and also pitch in on creator rights with campaigns like our InCreativeMonopolies.com or No COVID in Our Name artist letter, with our director, Evan Greer, who is, in addition to being an incredible activist, a full-time musician. I've also spent a decade in the music industry, so artist rights, in addition to the rights that I hope to have for myself as a creator, are also really important to me, given my history and the way that I've seen the industry really continue to consolidate and pick and choose winners and pay those winners less and less over the course of my career. So this is a pretty exciting conversation for me. And when it came up in my crit group, Discord actually was how I learned about Realms of Ruin. I immediately dove right in, and as some people who might be tuning in this conversation have noticed, had a lot to say about it. And then the next day, one of our other, we were on a call, but somebody's other call was running over. So Ayala and I had 10 minutes where I started telling her about what was happening with Realms of Ruin and how I thought it was so cool. And then, as a storyteller does, dropped the bomb of, and it's deleted from the internet. And we started having a conversation about that. And I kind of stopped her and said, hey, do you want to do a stream about this? Because I think that, this type of conversation and the activist perspective on what happened this week is really something that can be, of value as the community considers what sorts of projects to support and why, and how to vet them in the future, because Web3 is coming. So I guess the first thing that we want to do is be sure to have some definitions for this conversation, because we're going to be talking about a couple of, kind of techie concepts, as it were. So Ayala, do you want to define Web2 for us?
Yeah, so Web 2 is basically the internet that most of us know. It's social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And then there's a component about it that where we have, surveillance and data capitalism essentially happening with our, it's like you give, various applications access to your information in exchange to be able to use that service or that space to communicate or connect in any kind of way. And so in general, this kind of dynamic of going onto platforms, going onto applications as we know it is commonly referred to as Web 2.
Totally. And also, I think it's also worth pointing out that most of Web 2 is hosted on servers that are owned by companies like Amazon Web Services. They're very centralized at large companies. There are only like 2 or 3 companies that essentially host the internet that most of us use to live out a large portions of our daily lives. And so that brings us to Web3, which is the emerging next generation of the internet, which is being built on blockchain networks and can be hosted in a decentralized way on thousands of computers that are networked all around the globe. So that's really different in terms of like the base infrastructure from what we have now. And what that leads to is potentially a place where a lot of the manipulative things that are happening now with Facebook and Instagram and what have you can't happen, or can't happen in a way that we can't see. And and this new model also threatens to disintermediate and like disrupt everything from real estate to litigation to music rights administration. It's the full scope of what this change is going to be like is similar to before Web2, like when we were saying to each other, hey, there's this thing I heard of, it's called Facebook, should I get one? So that's really big and to me exciting. And I think that we only have 2 more definitions to get through, so bear with us. The first is a NFT, which is a non-fungible token, which is basically a digital item that cannot be duplicated, but that can easily be authenticated or programmed to behave in a specific way and shared. And we'll just leave that at that for now. I'm sure we'll talk more about NFTs in the context of Realms of Ruin in a minute. And then the last thing is a DAO, which is a distributed autonomous organization, which is basically a co-op that's built on blockchain. So there are thousands of these. There are some that are issuing grants to nonprofits collectively. There are some that are managing the rights to music at the request of the musicians who created it. And there are some that are developing new businesses. It's a way to collectively manage a project, whatever that project can be. And sometimes owning an NFT or some other kind of social token gives you more clout or rights in the DAO. And DAOs are often run on Discord servers, just like the Discord server that Realms of Ruin initially set up and launched with. It looks very similar. All right, so I've talked a lot already. Sorry, Ayala. But I guess like the first thing that we should lay out for people who maybe are tuning into this because they like Fight for the Future and have no idea what the heck Realms of Ruin is or was. I want to just lay that out real fast. So Realms of Ruin is a project that we are totally not affiliated with. We thought it was really cool, and that what happened was really sad, and that's why we're talking about it. We had no knowledge of it in advance. We don't know any of the players involved, and like I said, my writing crit group started talking about it over on the side, and I got distracted from my job and went over there and looked and was like, oh, this too can be my job. Great. So Realms of Ruin was a project that 6 authors, mostly people of color, mostly women, launched that was a writing project hosted on the Web3 on the blockchain with the idea of building a new universe called Realms of Ruin. They created all these characters and all these stories that they were going to put into the project for people to consume and get really immersed in. And these are very like celebrated authors. So it was a very exciting idea from the outset that they're going to create something new collaboratively, all these, really amazing creators coming together. And the next part, I think, was even cooler, which was they proposed to, after they had created this universe and contributed their initial stories, they were going to open it up so that fans and fellow creators could join and create stories, then contribute to the universe themselves, and get paid to do that, which I think is a really important point. So that sounded great to us, but unfortunately it didn't sound great to a lot of vocal folks in the writing community. So within 2 hours of them announcing this project, everything was deleted from the internet. And I think around that point is when I started yelling about it on Twitter. So yeah, I mean, I think like you had a really good initial like summary of thoughts that I really felt too as a fan and somebody who's excited by this when when I explained what Realms of Ruin was and what had happened. Do you have any anything that you want to start with?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely jump in. I have so many thoughts about this. I think, first of all, just to say to the folks who are involved in this project, it really is was truly brilliant, and it's a great idea. And as we look at kind of this democratizing that's happening in Web3, these are the things that are super exciting. And part of that is because we're moving things from this space of corporate ownership and this space of centralization to many people being able to participate and own and build out these spaces. But the other thing is, just as a fan, this is just so awesome, because this, for me, it's the authors and all that and what they built was good. But I immediately saw this as a person who loves fan fiction, as a person that values all fan creativity in general, whether it's art or it's just that we tend to have this idea that goes with the art world, and a lot of it is access and establishment, where certain things are really valued and other things are just poo-pooed on. And I feel like fan fiction is one of those things. I feel fairly new to the fan fiction verse. I've only been reading fan fiction for about 5 years, but I remember when I first started telling people, especially people who read, oh, I love fan fiction. When I discovered it, I was sharing it with everybody, and it was just wow, you read that? And I was what is going on? I never imagined there was this stigma. And then I later on found out that there is this huge stigma of fan fiction. The readers and some people read it and are closeted, and then the writers are seen as less than. And so my immediate response when I thought about this, the idea before I realized that it was taken down, was, oh, finally fan fiction writers are being recognized and are being given a platform option to be able to earn and monetize their work. And it's actually cool. If you write fan fiction, you want to put it on Tumblr or archive our own and just have people read it. That's cool too. Or you have your own website. But it's also awesome to have an option for folks to be able to do that. And also and for people who are published authors to be able to share this. I think the sharing of storytelling is super exciting. And, taking away some of these boundaries we have that exist now, oh, this is the book, it's the canon, and then this is the fan fiction. And the blending of those two is just what got me excited about the idea. So I can stop there, then I can kind of go into how I got pissed off when I heard it was Leah told me it was a perfect storytelling, because I was oh my God, I'm not celebrating. And then she told me what happened. I'm what the? And I was just I went straight down. I was so high and excited. I was already Googling, ready to sign on. I was trying to figure out, in my mind, I was plotting this out. And then when you told me it had to be pulled because it's some Twitter publishing group, I was what the heck? Because it was obvious to me that something beautiful had been created. And I felt there wasn't opportunity for a full conversation. Fans and folks who feel I didn't weigh in. A handful of folks from a particular world thought this was a bad idea, or didn't understand it and crushed it. And I think that's devastating. So I'll let you speak, and then we can talk about the devastation, because I have a lot of thoughts.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, one other, and just, from my particular realm of nerddom, as somebody who for the past 6 years, not being a morning person, has woken up at 5 a.m. on weekdays to write, and has, seen my crit group struggle to get the attention of literary agents and to find a platform for these, incredible works that they have poured their souls into. And I saw this as such a helpful little light in the dark. And I do want to say that Ayali and I are both are speaking very generally here. Please understand that when we say authors or publishing or YA Twitter or what have you, we're generalizing because there are many people in this space who are doing really awesome stuff. And we're just talking about this, but we wanted to have a conversation about this particular instance and the larger context. So for me, this was particularly exciting given the state of publishing and the ability to enter the publishing space as a writer, as an author. I immediately looked at this and saw it as an opportunity, again, for these people in fan fiction whose incredible skills has been largely undervalued to rise, as it were, in a different way than, and I'm gonna go Cory Doctorow on y'all for a second and just go ahead and shout out his collaboration with Rebecca Giblin, The Shakedown, which is coming out next year. It's all about this, but just real quick. So basically at the back of the dawn of Web 2, the publishing ecosystem didn't really want to look at the internet. They wanted to keep doing what they were doing. Music, on the other hand, was forced to by Napster, but publishing did not, as a whole, the major actors, look at the internet as an opportunity that they needed to be paying a lot of attention to. And that resulted in Amazon, and the situation in which Amazon was able to swoop in and scoop up the ebook market, to dominate the audiobook market, to become the largest bookseller and what is called a monopsony, in which the buyer actually has, a monopoly, as it were, over the sellers, because they're because the person that is buying the books from the publishers is the only entity that has the market to sell those books. So they're dictating the terms to the publishers. We can get there's a whole other, there's decades of conversation that could be had on that. But what that resulted in really was publishers having to accede to a large extent to Amazon's terms. And even more so now, and with Amazon controlling so much of the self-publishing market as well, they have this iron grip that seems almost unbreakable on the way that publishing at large conducts its business. Amazon's terms are the terms of the publishing industry. And so to try to live with that, publishing has consolidated and consolidated, big six, big five, big four. And there's really, has been no end in sight. And what that means is that publishing, as it consolidates, gets leaner and leaner. And the traditional roles that editors would take with authors, and also just their budgets to buy books, are changing. And more of the work that editors used to do in refining manuscripts and making books ready to be published is getting pushed off on literary agents, which are completely unaffiliated with publishers and who are now more or less the gatekeepers to being traditionally published. And so these people work for 15% of the, on average, of the greatly shrinking budgets that are being paid out to authors. So 15% of the artist's income from the book is what the agent makes. It's incredibly hard to become an agent unless you have financial resources to support you, you work a second job, et cetera, until you are established enough to have enough clients that their 15% can buy your groceries. And so literary agents, the gatekeepers, have to be incredibly selective about what books they take. So you can write an incredible book and it can just be not right for the market at this time, or the agents that you're sending it to can just be, overwhelmed by circumstance or thinking about leaving the industry themselves because it's so hard. And that means that there are more and more people who are writing books, but less and less opportunity to make those books real. And it's been that way for a while, and it just keeps seeming to get worse. And again, all of that is very well summarized in The Shakedown from Rebecca Giblin and Cory Doctorow. So book rec for this conversation. And so looking at a project like this, where it's a bunch of marginalized authors who've managed to make it through the gauntlet and be successful, and that they would have this vision for a different way to lift up people who are good at writing based on their talent, and hopefully and platform them. It made me really sad to see that not taken into, like we didn't get a chance to have a conversation about it because the project went away so fast because the backlash was so extreme. And I think, and I hope, you know, that this doesn't kill off other projects like that people are working on right now, that continue to, as Ayala said, democratize who gets honored and platformed in publishing, which creators have that ability to break through without, you know, selling their soul to Amazon. And so I think that that's a big part of the context for why I brought so much passion to this conversation specifically, and why this is kind of just taken over my brain. Like I was like laying awake at 2 a.m. last night thinking about it. Yeah, so that's a lot of talking again, but
yeah, jump in to dovetail something you're saying? I think the points you make are good. Like, yeah, I spoke a lot about fan fiction, but I also like get back to, you know, I'm a fan of stories. And so I think a lot of the points that Leah made about gatekeeping is essentially where we're like, that's the crux of understanding the difference between Web 2.0, like Web 2 and Web 3, is this like gatekeeping and like getting rid of that and having a more open system. I mean, YA authors, and I read a ton of YA authors, and shout out to all the YA authors out there, are doing some amazing stories, but those are the ones who make it through the gauntlet that Leah is talking about. And having like thinking of this idea, we're talking about an idea where like, yes, YA authors would also be able to benefit, and fan fiction writers would be able to benefit. That's the thing that I think got lost in all of this. Even some of the criticism was acting like the YA authors were doing something like unscrupulous. It's like, no, it's a coming together. It's a uniting. It's taking these very unnecessary hierarchical differences that are largely created that way so there can be gatekeepers, and saying, let's use this technology and let's kind of explore it, and let's explore in a way that is a win-win and democratizes storytelling. And that is so important. I mean, I think right now you see a lot of YA authors that are doing amazing, there's amazing verses on Rishaverse, Children of Blood and Bone, The Priory of the Orange Tree, that are really like having diverse characters and inclusion and different, you know, gender identities and folks of different orientation. It's just really awesome because for a long time it was like, okay, we can imagine dragons, but like we can't imagine a female hero. And not to at all take away from authors like Robin Hobbs and people who have been doing this, but it's expanded to a level. And when you think about the representation that's happened recently, and then you think about democratizing it even further, where you have folks from all over the world that can participate in something like Realms of Ruin, it's just mind-blowing to me. The stories that have yet to be brought to like a large platform, because a lot of times they do exist, but it's just about this platform and access and connection. And I get super excited. And then the flip side of that is, because at some point we have to, you know, talk about the backlash, but, you know, the backlash is upsetting because, yeah, it's like, this is going to happen. And are we saying that we're much more comfortable with gatekeepers and corporations establishing these spaces for everyone to jump into? Because then they're just going to establish it with the same mentality they've always had. And this is an opportunity to use the technology. We know this is going to happen. Like eventually, you know, Disney will have a space, and, you know, different verses like, you know, will have a space like Star Wars. Like this will eventually be conventional, just like everybody has a website.
Oh my gosh! When you talk about Disney having a space where, yeah. I think that touches on something really key though, because there's this whole huge thing, and with the SFWA, Science Fiction Writers of America, Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America, that that with Disney Must Pay, where Disney was just like, you know, we don't believe that we actually have to adhere to the contracts and all of these authors who like wrote books for these universes that we acquired from Lucasfilm or wherever, and I think that points out like why this space is so reactive, like nuclearly reactive, is that like authors have been betrayed at every turn by the existing actors. Like their suspicion of new things has a foundation in fact, like that these gatekeepers have toxified the space, and like put, you know, again, investors over artists to the point that, you know, like anything new can look like a scam with the glasses and the context of what has happened before on. So I don't think like that we're saying that people who did this are necessarily bad people, but we're saying that the result was really tragic because there was never even really a conversation about it in a meaningful way.
I think that's the big bit. Like, I think absolutely, like, folks have all gone on their respective journeys, and there is a lot of stuff that is toxic and to be suspicious of, but that's why we have the conversation. And I think that for me is like, if we have the conversation and all, you know, it's inclusive and folks are participating, at the end we say, well, I don't know if I would still be okay with that end result, but, you know, whatever the end result is, then at least collectively we've kind of discussed this. But I think that it was really, you know, killed before there was an opportunity for that conversation and the opportunity for the engagement. And also, like I'm saying, like, and it's hard to say this without reinforcing these dynamics, but like, people in the publishing world may be having a different experience with world building and storytelling than people who are fan fiction writers and art creators and just general fans altogether. Like, there's just so many different folks in this space, and I think that's why it's so important. But I think, you know, getting into just some of the actual little criticisms they had, like when we start talking about, you know, teenagers and their access to different components of Web 3.3, and so I'm getting used to Web 3 versus Web 3.0, but yeah, Web 3 and social tokens and stuff like that. Like, I think these are all specific kind of conversations that are really important to have. A lot of the fan art and stories are created by teenagers, you know, and that is the part of the reality of that space. And I don't know if there are definitely things, and it's worth having a conversation, because of course we want it to be a safe space, but by default of being Web3 and by default of being an NFT doesn't make it unsafe. And so I think that there are concerns where we can say, yeah, this is a concern. Like, we want to make sure we create this space to be safe, not just for young people, but for creators and everybody, because, you know, this is new and there's a learning curve here, as opposed to just making that like, oh, this immediately is going to be exploitation. There's like nothing redemptive. And I think that's concerning.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that it's good to interrogate just for a second, probably how like why this can't be built on Web 2, and again, why specifically for teenagers. I think we've already talked a lot about, you know, fan fiction, and that a lot of it is written by teens, and that they and I think we can all acknowledge, you know, looking at the organizational power of youth, with whether it's the Sunrise Movement or Encode Justice, which is an amazing youth-led digital rights organization that we've been working with more and more. Like, we can probably all agree that like teens deserve a platform. They deserve to exist where so much of everyone else's lives are happening, which is online. But unfortunately, with Web 2 and its, you know, surveillance capitalist business model, we've just seen with the Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen that that Instagram, which is one of the biggest places for teens in particular to engage with the artists and worlds and books that they love, is damaging their mental health severely, and that the platforms are aware of that, and that they are choosing profit over the well-being of people on the platforms, and that alternatively artists then have to feed that beast, because that's the only place where they can be platformed in this ecosystem, this extremely monopolized ecosystem now. And so that's like one reason that like this Web 2 isn't really hospitable to something that comes that comes from this far from left field and is so creative and different and democratizing. It's just like the sheer force of monopoly and the ability to reach people with this sort of project. Shadow banning is real. And then the other thing that it's important to note is why they were talking about using NFTs. And a big part of why that is because an NFT can be a contract, it can be smart, it can be programmed to do a lot of the things that make managing a project, like imagine like launching a website where we're going to pay fans to write fiction, and then we're going to let them set the price for what they get paid for this fiction. And then we are going to acquire that fiction, and like the absolute web and weight of middlemen and administration required to do that on Web2 is massive. Whereas if you have a standard way in which like which you are sharing rights with, or giving rights, or what have you, as the writer of the fan fiction, whatever that agreement is, it can be just be built into the NFT itself. So that eliminates about, I don't know, a lot of the overhead. I don't want to put a percentage on it because I don't have one, but instead of a total nightmare that's extremely expensive and also very non-transparent, using NFT to do this is an instance of like a new technology enabling something that authors would never have been able to do for their biggest fans before. Like this is basically what they're trying to do is a next gen fan club where fans aren't just fans, they're also creators. And that's rad as all hell. And something that this technology uniquely enables. Again, so like, and I mean, I know like ILA, like we all see it in the space, like the word NFT is pretty toxic, and that there's a lot of skepticism about what's happening in this space, right? What's your take on that, or how do you, when you're looking at different projects, like parse that with our acknowledgement that like, yes, there are scams out there, just like any other human endeavor on the internet?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the thing is that part of the introduction of NFTs for a lot of people were media that also are not, to me, they don't necessarily understand what's happening with Web3. I think they saw the big numbers that were reported with like Banksy and other artists, and they were like, "Oh, this can't make any sense," and it was just like an immediately dismissed, kind of like being immediately dismissive, and then finding evidence to support that. So I think we kind of went down the wrong road when it came to this conversation from the very beginning, or at least a road that led to NFTs being like really sus in most people's minds. And I think for me, it's a little bit different. I work in tech space. I work with some of these issues, and so like investigating and research is like a part of what we do. I've always, folks who aren't in this space, reading an article, that's about as much capacity they have. But I really would invite people who are creatives, people who are fans of creatives, just are a fan of art in general, people who really believe in democratizing power, to take a second look at this, because there is something really awesome happening. And for folks who are a little bit older, may have been aware when we transitioned from like dial up to Web2, like Web2, who were like kind of aware of that shift and really present during it. Well, kind of that, like this is that, and then like times a million, because the lessons learned of like, oh, we thought it was like Facebook was going to be cool because we could connect with people, and that's before we realized, oh no, they're an overlord controlling information and like taking our data and like monetizing it and doing all this stuff that's really invasive and uncomfortable. And not only that, they're going to be a gatekeeper to determine who can be on their platform and who can't. And that means getting rid of like pro-Palestinian groups and like groups that are working to advance like sex worker rights and other things that are in solidarity with our work. And so that was the like excitement, and then again like poo-poo. Now this space that we thought we'd be able to connect and create in is this like really toxic thing. Lessons learned. Web3 is decentralized to go. Like from the onset, it has this democratized infrastructure and accountability and governance. And all these things are things that, like, to Trump to be able to then be able to say, oh yeah, we can have the connection and creativity. We thought we were going to have this other thing. But the difference is the technology and infrastructure is set up to really facilitate that. And it's affordable. Like, people are always like, oh, you can build a website. It's like, yeah, you might be able to get a website from like Squarespace for like $16.99 or whatever it is now. But when you're talking about building a verse and platforms like we are, like the hosting fees on Web2 are so expensive. And I think that's another thing, is like there's financial barriers that just make that not possible. There's a reason there's not a lot of alternatives to Facebook and Instagram and these spaces. And you know, with Web3, we see an affordability that allows allows a lot more people to come in and create and connect and just develop new ideas. And so I think NFTs, as we see them right now with the art, and is like the beginning. It's like a proof of concept. It's like the very beginning of where we are and where this can go. And in the future, it's going to go far beyond this. You know, you might get to a point where, like, you're in college, like that's how you're getting your textbooks. So there's so many different real world case scenarios, and that's why Realms of Ruin is exciting, because just like we see the NFTs with the art and how that's become democratized, and you have artists, and also it not only democratizes access, it democratizes what we consider to be art. And that is such a powerful and important conversation that has been happening for hundreds of years. And this is like, okay, like, and Realms of Ruin was that, like the beginning, like the concept, like this is what we're doing, but in a storytelling sense. And so it is all interconnected. It is all super powerful. And I guess the piece I would kind of end on with this is just like, as someone who works in advocacy and activist space, like this work is not just about stories. It to me is about how a lot of people connect and like I was telling Leah yesterday, like feel possible in the world. Like they may live in a reality, especially young people, that for however they identify says you are not possible or you have to be X. And stories and YA and fan fiction give them a point of connection to say, I can be in the world, I am possible, and realize themselves in ways that are super powerful. And YA and fan fiction writers being able to imagine and building verses that function in ways that our verses, like our quote unquote reality, is so far from, where there aren't racial differences, where you're transgender, and like it's not, you know, it's not going to lead to you being like excluded from society or your family. Like these are concepts, just like you have flying dragons, you have, you know, you have these other, you have female heroines, and you have characters of different races that are like in the same family, like not necessarily friends, they're literally like brother and sister. And that's powerful. And it will result in a better world, because I think sometimes now we have a crisis of imagination. And I see all of this intersects to me with the activism and making the world a better place, because we're imagining in these spaces different worlds. I said a lot. Yeah.
I love that. God, I love that so much. And the notion that we might be coming to a time where it's not the traditional gatekeepers don't have the same level of power in telling people whose imagination is valid or deserves to be platformed. That's really exciting to me. And it fits well, I think, to everything that you've said with just some of the other projects that are going on in the space that are being built on blockchain. And I think just for a second, because I think this was probably publishing's first moment of seeing a really like forward-thinking Web3 project come to their doorstep. This is happening. This technology is something that the UN has been working with since 2017 in order to do basic income and support for refugees in Jordan. And yesterday, the AP announced that it's going to be using a blockchain network to distribute race calls, economic data, sports games outcomes, business financials. We know of journalist orgs that we partner with and who are also advocating for this technology, who are now able to pay journalists who are in countries where their journalism is a risk to their lives and their families in a way that is secure and untraceable, and that is incredibly empowering, and do much more than pay, but I'll just leave it there for now. And similar payments across borders. We talk about remittance fees for a second, where people who are working, maybe in the United States and sending money back to their home country are often charged up to 15% of the money they're sending to do that by financial services like MoneyGram. And with blockchain and cryptocurrency, they're able to do that for a fraction of that. And that's really exciting and empowering, just across so many use cases of our financial institutions, and the fact that the only thing that they've innovated for everyday people in 50 years is more fees. And then also just like in the creative space specifically, we've seen, NFTs and art and visual art and what have you, but this is also being used by musicians right now to create the exact sort of next gen fan club that these authors were proposing to do, where fans are rewarded for their promo work, for their word of mouth circulation of music and art. But with NFTs or DAOs or different crypto methods of doing that, automating that in a way that just isn't feasible with Web2 and with old technology. So there's a lot of precedent, I think, for this, and the knee jerk of anything Web3 is a scam. I don't think is really, it's just not the right one. Yeah, sure, there are scams. There are always going to be scams wherever humans go, because that's part of what we do. That's just part of our animal nature to like go try to make a quick buck off of somebody gullible. And not all of us, but the fact that exists in the space shouldn't condemn the entire existence of Web3 or creators' rights to be on that and be doing this sort of like legitimate community building work. And so I think, and I guess like one other instance, actually, I'm gonna tag Joe. Hey, Joe, who's running this stream for us, and I'm sure has learned more than he ever wants to know about about this subject. I know that you've been working a lot on video games and blockchain type stuff, and in terms of specifically like teens engaging with NFT or blockchain projects, that's already happening like en masse with video games, isn't it?
Yeah, there are a lot of examples of stuff that's in development or being currently used that uses like NFTs or like social tokens or cryptocurrency in general. Did you want me to like highlight a few examples maybe?
Yeah, give us like one or two, maybe, just so
Yeah,
that.
so one that I think is super interesting is something called, a lot of these are sort of familiar to what you're describing with the world building and stuff. There's a project called Decentraland, which is a virtual reality game where there's like open space. You can literally buy a plot of land and materials to like build structures and objects and things like that. And there is a finite space in this world, and you can like own and create like an entire city, or like you could work with people and build an entire, and it's sort of like the dream of virtual reality of a real parallel dimension that exists in computers that has real objects with consequences that are destructible, and like things are actually happening. So these types of things allow people to do this community storytelling and create these alternate realities that are tangible and may not be like physically real, but in terms of like consequences and ownership and uniqueness are real. We're also seeing like trading card games and Pokemon clones and stuff like that. But this type of tech really enables the people the ability to world build in ways that were previously totally impossible, or like the way that they're done now when compared to what you can do with social tokens. uh Modern like standard virtual worlds like World of Warcraft and stuff like that are kind of fake in comparison when you think about the consequences of either universe. And there's just super interesting stuff going on in gaming.
Yeah, that is all super interesting. Also very similar to what we're talking about here. And I think like there's one other little bit to tease out. There's so much more to tease out, but like one that I wanted to that I was just thinking of as you were talking, Joe, is the concept that like people have to pay to contribute or pay to be a part of these projects in a way that they don't have to on Web2. And I think like, and specifically in the instance of Realms of Ruin, there was a necessity that if you wanted to contribute a story, you would have to pay to do that. And there was a lot of misconception about like, what you're going to make teenagers pay you to write stories, and no, that wasn't quite right, because what was happening there was more of an authentication transaction, pretty similar to like if PayPal connecting to your bank account or what have you, where you would literally just they would ensure that you were real, as an anti-spam measure, and that you wbut verifying that the person who submits the story can be paid for it in the future. But I think that like in a larger context with other projects, we're seeing like we may see that people actually do have to pay to get in, or a monthly fee or a subscription or something like that to engage with a Web3 project. And I think that it's good to name and just a little bit, Ayala, maybe, and tease out how people are paying to participate in Web2 now, and how that is, and if it may not be money, but like there's still a lot of value being extracted to engage in these quote unquote free spaces.
Yeah, Web2 is not free. And where I would say Web3, when it comes to validating minting, there is a very specific cost, and you can choose to pay that or not. With Web3, we are paying with our personal lives, the images of those we love. We are paying with personal information. We are paying with our web browsing history that most people would consider to be private. And I think, we are paying in ways that I am not even aware of, because an algorithm determines how we're paying. But to get that into real, like, specific impacts, like, what does this mean? It means a company like Clearview can go and scrape social media and grab all of our images and then put it in the database and sell access to that to law enforcement, government, and just corporations and employers and everyday people. And then that can be paired with facial recognition technology that's faulty and discriminatory and racist, and have implications from false arrests to people getting fired, to people not having access to their building because their building requires facial recognition for them to gain access to their home. Next thing you know, you get locked out because if you're misidentified, and you have to wait till Monday till you have access to your apartment. This is happening to people right now. Other case scenarios are, this happens. I've gotten at least in the past year 4 letters saying, oh, your data was leaked and you need to do, like, you can have 3 months of this free random service to make sure that you don't have any security issues. And it's like, it's ridiculous how common it's become for these companies to, have really insecure platforms and spaces. We're quote unquote going on there with free access, but our personal information You know, sometimes banking information, sometimes login information is exposed, and there are bad actors on too, just like we're talking about everywhere else, and they will exploit this. And so, you know, you're looking at that. You're looking at, you know, possible security issue. You're looking at privacy violations. You're looking at images that you thought were private and you want to share with your family in a different area being used and put into a database that could later on be used for criminalization purposes. You know, or you have a family member that's undocumented, and next thing you know, they're being rounded up and deported. There are so many unforeseen circumstances. It is scary, and Web2 has turned that into a business, and we have, without understanding and knowledge, basically become the civilian surveillance empire that we have been afraid of or weary of for decades when we talk about Big Brother. You know, essentially big tech turned us into Big Brother, and we are within that space. We are the ones who are and our tech is being used to surveil us, take our data, and use it against us in various ways. And meanwhile, these corporations are making billions without any kind of regulation to ensure that we are protected, we are safe, and we are secure. And there are for folks who care a lot about, as human right oriented, there are national security implications for this as well. I mean, this is definitely a human impact crisis, but it goes all the way to the top levels of government and when it comes to the level of insecurity. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would also add in one more point, just about this, like this point, like, are you asking teenagers to pay to validate in the same way, you know, like you said, PayPal takes their fees whenever they're doing their transactionary bit when we do a web transaction. It's very similar to that. But, you know, in a conversation, had this been a conversation and not a takedown, I think we would have had space to think, maybe the community organizes in a way where a fund is set aside for folks who can't afford to validate.
I think they actually did that even.
Yeah, see, like I don't even know, because and that's the thing, like there are solutions to these situations, right? And the fact that they might have done that or probably did that or did do that speaks to the intentionality that went into thinking about this space, right? So it's kind of like, yeah, we pay transaction fees for all the transactions we do on Two. That's normal. And Two doesn't have a fund set up in case we can't afford those fees. So, you know, I think there are real remedies to this, and this is why the conversation is so important.
Totally. Yeah, I know we're coming up on the hour, and I know you actually came in on one of your days off, ILA, because you wanted to talk about this with me, and I'm so grateful. Because man, this has been a rad conversation. I think like the other thing that we would be remiss not to touch on is the energy usage and the climate concerns around that come with, like, when people see NFT, a lot of them immediately think like burning the planet. And there's nuance that we don't have time to get into, but like for this project specifically, and like as you're thinking about, you know, any Web3 project or any you know, NFT or token, social token, whatever it is, anything on the blockchain, like it's really important to be aware that there are many different chains, foundations on which to build a project, and that some of them are very energy intensive, but some of them are like and in this case, the one that Realms of Ruin was using, like it took more energy to do a Twitter takedown thread on Realms of Ruin than it would take to make a story on Realms of Ruin. And so I think that that's just another important nuance that folks should continue to bring to their lens on projects that are happening in this space. That just because it's NFT or blockchain or Web3, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's consuming any more energy than a website.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, to our environment friends, because we're all in solidarity, with what needs to happen for us to make meaningful change when it comes to saving our environment. Also just like be mindful, like we're using words as we're having this conversation, like democratization, we're using words like decentralization, we're using words like artists and, having like being able to have like control of their work, and the same kind of intentionality and mindset of justice and equality and equity that goes into thinking about that. There are people who are creating these change who are, like environmental, like what we need to do, climate change is a part of that ethos. And so I think a lot of times people tend to have read or heard something about Bitcoin, and then they project that onto all the other coins. And all the other chains and the technology,
everything,
and just blockchain, the entire Web3, and so I'm not, that like what's going on in Bitcoin, I think is a different conversation, but in general, like what Leah said is so important. I would really, really just want to like emphasize for folks, there are people who are creating on these platforms, and there are these platforms where they are thinking about energy. And there's even some that may be using something that's energy intensive now, who are thinking about what that transition is going to look like. And then, so there's so much intentionality in this space. Obviously, working to create democratized space at the expense of the planet is not what anybody who like is moving with that in their intention in creating spaces like Realms of Ruin. That's not a goal. That's not an end. That's not an end game. And so I think, the platform they chose was a platform that does not have, like, we're not going to be concerned with the energy rate and what it's burning. And I think that was a part of decision making that more than likely went into that platform. But I would just say in general, like as people are looking at this, like you can absolutely participate in Web3 and NFTs and say, I only want to do stuff that's environmentally friendly. And that option's available to you because there are folks thinking about that in the space. So that's what I would just say.
And can I just throw one extra thought into there? Something about the energy conversation surrounding cryptocurrencies and NFTs always bugs me a little bit, because we think about the amount of corporate energy waste that happens, industrial energy waste that happens. And it reminds me of the conversation that we often have about individual responsibility for things like recycling and stuff, where nobody's talking about how much energy does Spotify use. No one's asking how much energy does YouTube use, or Facebook, or Instagram, or the current banking system.
Yeah.
But when it comes to a technology that stands to liberate people, to make communities that are trying to build something independent, that empowers individual users, it suddenly must be carbon neutral. There's no question about it, and people go crazy over it. But like, I would almost argue that like, if it's enabling something that is like liberating people all over the world, and it stands to possibly replace like much more oppressive systems, it's allowed to use energy. Like, yes, we should be trying to be as like energy neutral as possible, but it's like a totally insane conversation to hold these systems up to such incredible standards when we're not even talking about, industrial waste or big tech waste at all. And it just feels like really dishonest, or like people are being used and corralled into these conversations to tarnish reputations of things that would actually be very like liberatory and build a better society.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much nuance to the whole thing, and I think that that's just, again, what was lost when this project was torpedoed and down within 2 hours of launching. So I hope that folks have enjoyed listening to us carry on about this, and I really hope to see more projects like Realms of Ruin in the future come and fix some of the problems in a really creative and special way that we as lovers of the space see and are working, also as activists on our side to change. Cool. I think we're good.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you so much, ILA. Have a good weekend.
You too. Bye-bye.
Yeah, same to you guys.